Let me invite the dynamic Indian of the Millennium Awardee, Dr. M. Manickam, Executive Vice Chairman of Sakthi Sugars Limited and Chairman and Managing Director of Sakthi Auto Component Limited, to deliver the keynote address on entrepreneurship, sailing the crests and troughs. Dr. Manickam is the Chairman of the Governing Council of various technical institutions run by Sakthi Group, Chairman Dr. Mahalingam College of Engineering, Pollachi, and currently is the President of South Indian Sugar Mills Association, Tamil Nadu. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome him with a huge round of applause to splash us with the depth of the entrepreneurship ocean.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm very happy to be here this morning and, in the presence of Mr. Lakshminarayan and Mrs. Nandini, Anusha and others here, and Mr. Shokkumar from ICT. In fact, it's a very great occasion where you have all colleges, faculty, and industry getting together to talk about various crises or various opportunities which are facing the students, which are facing the colleges. And we have an option to debate and to develop it further. And I was just talking with Mr. Lakshminarayan, he said Coimbatore zone is probably one of the few zones where we have very active interaction between the industry and the institute. And also we produce about 40% of the graduates, engineering graduates in the state. Today, you are looking at unemployment, or we are not getting placement in colleges. This is what we are worried about. What radical question is, in fact, the IT companies are talking about off-campus recruitment versus in-campus recruitment because it gives them an opportunity to recruit over the whole year rather than going into one particular time. So it actually gives them a lot more freedom. From a college perspective, should we look at IT companies alone as a single target for us, or should we look at something else? This is what we need to look at. So I think we have an option to look at manufacturing, we have an option to look at services, we have a lot of other things we should prepare our students. And all that comes back to something like entrepreneurship. And here I would like to mention just offline. I've met an entrepreneur in Coimbatore in the last year, and I think he's probably one of the best entrepreneurs that Coimbatore has produced. And he has made it to the top 100 in time list. I think the first person from Coimbatore, Mr. Arunachala Muruganathan. I mean, you look at Muruganathan, you talk to him, he's brilliant. I mean, I am really impressed with the person. He doesn't have a formal qualification, started his life as a textile worker, and he's made it to the Time magazine today. And you talk about entrepreneurship, and he's very humble. I mean, what really impressed me about him was, he's a very humble person and has put his entire life in front of everybody. He said he started making sanitary napkins for women. That's how we started the whole thing. And now today he says, I'm competing with Procter & Gamble, I'm competing with Johnson & Johnson, and I'm creating brands, 200 brands I have created in competition with Johnson & Johnson and Procter & Gamble. He's very happy about it. I mean, that is something very amazing. And he also talked about his personal crisis. How because of his passion for his job, his family threw him out, his wife left him. And it's like, he's a person who is very open. I mean, normally most of us wouldn't tell our personal issues in an open forum. And he's a person who just comes out and says, this is what happened. And his wife is with him again, he's got a child, he's leading a great life. But very humble, very open, and very Coimbatorian, which is what I liked about him. And that is what Coimbatore is about, entrepreneurship, and we face the challenges. I'm glad that I got this opportunity to be here today to talk to you. And I thought I'll also add a couple of clips on it so that it doesn't just become a monologue. So I'd like to first talk about entrepreneurship, sailing through troughs and crests. Basically, you face a lot of problems when you're an entrepreneur. You must be a little mad if you want to be an entrepreneur. Otherwise, normally, government சம்பளத்துக்கு போயிரு ஒரு வேலையும் இல்லை நீ take your job in the government. What do you mean by take a job in the government? Nobody can fire you. You join in until you retire. Whether you are working or not working, you will get your salary. unless you do something really bad. And if you do nothing, you'll never do anything really bad. So predominantly what you have in the government is in the file, you never get a black mark, you get promoted. And the only person who gets a black mark is the guy who tried to do something. The guy who didn't do anything has a perfect file, he gets promoted. So as you go higher on the government, the competence level goes down. In the private sector, it's quite different. So let's talk about entrepreneurship now. This is just a definition of entrepreneur. He's an innovator playing the role of dynamic businessman and adding to economic development. This is what Schumpeter said. And Timmons' definition is that an entrepreneur is a person who does something in spite of the fact he can't do it. He doesn't have resources to do it. He's not supposed to do it. It's like a bumblebee. Bumblebee is not supposed to fly with all the aerodynamic laws, but bumblebee flies. And bumblebee is the fastest flying being on earth. But the aerodynamic laws that we know as is today really say that bumblebee cannot fly. So is the bumblebee wrong or are we wrong? No, we need to really examine that. So I'll just show a clip on this.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Mrs. Nandini talked about Apple. This is actually a small clip from Apple. Be different, and think original. And most people who actually started thinking original, even Steve Jobs was fired out of Apple, if you remember. Actually, the board of directors thought he was mad, and they fired him. They hired another guy from Pepsi. He ruined the company. And after 8 years or 10 years, Steve Jobs came back and again built the Apple as what we see today. So entrepreneurship is something which is not normally understood. If you define an entrepreneur, he's actually a lonely person. He defines a path which only he sees. Everybody else sees a wall there and he sees a door there. Okay, and if he tells there's a door, everybody says he's mad. Okay, an entrepreneur is a person who has to lead a lonely path. And when he's leading that, he has to be very confident. Let's say I'm telling you there's a door and you're saying there's a wall. And everybody there says it's a wall and I'm saying it's a door. So either I must be mad, or I must be 100% sure that I am seeing a door there. So I must be really confident. To be an entrepreneur, you have to convince people. You need to convince bankers. You need to convince your wives. You need to convince your children. You need to convince everybody around you. Okay, so that means you need a lot of self-confidence and you need to be really positive. You see an opportunity whenever you face a calamity. Right, which again is crazy. And welcome failures as a way to success. I mean, this definition of entrepreneur, if you read it, no normal human being will do this. Because you are actually going against normal thought. A guy who has failed will not be trusted to do the job again. And a guy who's smiling when he's facing a difficulty is supposed to be mad. So these are all traits that you have for an entrepreneur. He has to really see an opportunity, and this is what we would say as an entrepreneur. So we'll see one more clipping about what we talk about entrepreneur. This is by Kali Fiona, who's the CEO of HP.
And there is a difference between management and leadership. Management is the production of acceptable results within known constraints and conditions. Very important. But management is not leadership. Leadership is all about changing the order of things. But Machiavelli said something very interesting about change. Machiavelli said there is nothing so difficult or so dangerous as to undertake to change the order of things. And that is true. It is difficult and it is sometimes dangerous because people resist and people are afraid. And that is why only leaders can drive change.
Okay, we're talking about management and leadership here. And Kali was CEO of Hewlett Packard. And she took over actually after Mr. Packard came back to revive the company, and Kali came in, and then she actually did a good job in running the company. A manager is a person who manages a situation with known constraints and given conditions. He's not supposed to manage uncertainty. He's supposed to manage certainty and make sure that it is delivered every day on time, every day as it is to be delivered. And you put an entrepreneur, he has no certainty. I mean, you actually put this guy into a situation where there's no rules. In fact, my father used to say, it's a very funny thing. Whenever you have a small discussion, you send a normal person. That's a normal guy. When you have a problem of managing the situation because of some system failure, you send a manager. When you have a problem of policy, where policy decision has to be taken, you send a general manager. When you have a situation which is of strategic importance, where you can't really, even the policies don't work, you need to change your strategy, you send a managing director. When there's absolute chaos, when there's nothing, the whole thing is collapsed, nobody can see any logic, you send a politician. Because we blame politicians for a lot of things, but imagine a politician is a guy who walks into a muck and makes something out of the muck. He's capable. I mean, where a normal human being, a normal manager cannot, or normal managing director cannot function, a politician will make the bridge. And the sacrifice is his reputation. I mean, that's a different issue. But a politician to be a politician is the toughest job. You really can bridge the gap between Hindus and Muslims don't like each other, you put a politician there, he'll find a gap. Or, Shias and Sunnis, you need to have a politician. They don't have a politician in Iraq. If they had a politician, probably they wouldn't have issues now. So you need to have a politician to find a gap between, which we can't link. Similarly, an entrepreneur is a person who goes into a situation where there is something which is not defined. Now we have my Professor C.K. Prahalad on the leadership.
What about leadership? What does this brave new world you're describing mean for leadership and for leaders in the 21st century?
I think I would say several very important distinctions. One, leaders must lead. You cannot lead unless you are future-oriented. Leadership is about the future. Leadership is about a point of view about that future. And leadership is about hope. I cannot say I'm a great leader, but no change, folks. That makes no sense. Leadership is about change. It is about the future. So the first thing is we must have a distinct point of view, not about our current affairs, but how the world can be 10 years from now. That is the first principle of a good leader. I'm arguing strategy and leadership is not extrapolate the current situation to the future, but imagining the future and folding that future in. That means leaders must have a point of view about how our system can operate and what the underlying principles ought to be. And that is a critical part of the book. N equal to 1, R equal to G is a fundamental view of how the world can be. Not necessarily everybody is there, but that's how it should be. I call it democratizing commerce. Because if you think about what we are doing, every person has the opportunity to have their share of voice in how they consume, what they consume, and how much they will pay for it. That doesn't mean the company has to give them what they want at the price they want, but they have to accept it. So that's the first principle. The second, leadership, the metaphor I like to use is that of a sheepdog. Sheepdog has to follow some rules. One, you're always behind. Number two, you can bark a lot, but don't bite. And don't lose any sheep. But you better know where you're going. This, I think, is a better metaphor than the shepherd, because the shepherd can be anywhere, and most of them assume they're ahead of the sheep. The reason I'm saying that, I think, is when talent becomes the critical resource for running these companies, and the talent is distributed around the world, intercultural competence, interpersonal competence, the capacity to get people from different parts of the world, from China, India, Germany, UK, and United States and Brazil, all to work together, requires the ability of a good sheepdog. How to talk to people constantly, how to motivate them, how to get them to see the tasks on hand, and how to reduce the frictional losses in pulling people together from multiple cultures. That becomes a dominant theme. So it is not the great man view of leadership. It is somebody who gets you to be as good as you can be.
Okay, so actually we talked about leadership here. Now how a leader should be there, that's entrepreneurs. I mean, just to give you an example, last week I was in the US. We've got a factory there in Detroit, downtown Detroit. We've started a factory, we have about 150 people working. Before I went there, I did a socio-economic background analysis of Detroit. When I did that, 90% of the population living in Detroit today are Afro-Americans. There are 700,000 people living there, 90% is Afro-Americans. And 60% of the households are headed by the mother and children, there's no father. 10% of the households are headed by the father and children, then there's no mother. It's all single parent households, 70% of the households. Only 30% of the households have both parents living with the children. So we did an analysis, okay, what is a problem of a single parent? First thing, where do you leave your child? When you go to work, you have a problem, you have to leave the child in a daycare. Secondly, when you come back from work, and if you're particularly a factory worker, when you're coming back from work, you work 10 hours, you travel 2 hours, you come back home, you need to cook and feed the children. You don't have time to cook, or you're tired, you just buy some junk food and throw it at them. So we said, okay, let's make a difference. First thing we said, we'll open up the corporate kitchen to all employees. We have a kitchen where employees get subsidized food when they work. Let's say they have lunch or they have dinner. So what we said, let's now allow them to buy and take food home. If they have 5 children, you take food for 5 at the same cost that we give in the canteen. We don't take a loss. We subsidize it to the extent, so they will be able to buy it about 1/4 the cost that they will be able to get outside, and it will be wholesome. We will let them run the menus. This is like unbelievable. Secondly, we said, why don't we start a daycare center in the factory itself? Because every parent is actually leaving the child in a daycare center and they're spending $1,000 a month on daycare. The moment we said we are going to introduce both of these, we could see a phenomenal change, phenomenal welcome in the people. They said, this is fantastic. My accountant wants it. My worker wants it. Everybody is actually having the same issues. So when you go proactively, then we are now talking about holding the employees for a long time. We are looking at no attrition of people. And when we mentioned this to General Motors, we suddenly became a very favorite supplier of General Motors. No, they said, this is something which we have not heard about before. And I said, listen, this is not we would do in our town normally. I'm not talking about something new. In Coimbatore, we would do it all the time. So this is something we want to bring to Detroit. So in fact, it's come to a stage where you have abilities in India which we can port to the US now. And we have opportunities. This is something where I think we're talking about employment of youngsters. We can send a lot of managers into the US. They don't have managers. We need to have a lot of middle-level managers, technical and managerial. This is something where I think we can build up a huge talent pool and send it over. Now talking about sailing to troughs and crests, this is a top that's a name of my topic. So entrepreneur normally has successes and failures, mostly more failures than success, because once he succeeds, he relaxes. He's been working towards a goal, he gets it, then he's relaxed. He's got his job done. So until he gets his success, he has failures. And he has to ride the crest and actually endure the troughs without drowning. At last, he may not be remembered for his successes. Nobody will remember a good deed done by you. They'll only remember your failures. I'll tell you about a person who failed and we remember about him next one. And regardless of the criticisms, he actually has to keep on moving, only based on his own evaluation about himself. This is again a very lonely path an entrepreneur has to lead. Now let's talk about Napoleon. Can anybody tell you what you remember about Napoleon? What's the famous occasion for Napoleon? I'm not hearing any voices. Waterloo. Brilliant. What happened in Waterloo? He lost. Can you tell me something good about him? No, that is true. But what happens is, what we remember, the human being remembers Waterloo. He lost the Waterloo, then he was banished to prison and he died in 100 days. That is the end of his life. We don't remember the battles he won. We don't remember what he's done. So what we remember, he's an entrepreneur. He did a fantastic job in his lifetime. And we don't remember him for the good things. Similarly, an entrepreneur cannot expect to be remembered for every good thing he did. Okay. We talked about Sarvana Bhavan. What do you remember? Let me not go beyond that. Okay. So everything we remember about negative things. We should not look at, we should look at the positive things. Okay, Waterloo is what? Obvious answer. Is a battle where he lost. His most valuable contribution, the metric system that we have today, millimeters, meters, grams, milliliters, was introduced by Napoleon. Does any of us, our entire science today sits on it. Do we remember that? Or do we even know that? No. Napoleonic Code, this is a uniform civil code, was introduced by Napoleon the first time. Religious emancipation. In fact, he made France a Catholic nation, but gave freedom to the Jews and to the Protestants who were living in ghettos. Those days, if the majority religion ruled the roost, the minority had to live in secluded areas, and he actually gave them the religious freedom. And he enters the first central bank in the country. A reserve bank for France was established firstly by Napoleon. Other countries didn't have a bank at that time. So these are things which are done phenomenally by him. We don't remember that. We only remember Waterloo. Right? He was an entrepreneur. So as an entrepreneur, I don't really think that somebody is going to remember me for the good things I've done. So I actually have to rest on my own conviction. I have to rest on what I've done to my satisfaction, rather than the satisfaction of the world. This is something you need to remember as an entrepreneur. You will never become an MGR. Okay, you will not be as popular as MGR, but you will be remembered for your failures. And just to quote him, these are the Napoleonic codes, which actually came, the 5 codes. The Civil Code in 1804, the Procedure of Civil Code 1806, Code of Commerce 1807, Code of Instruction for Criminals 1808, and the Penal Code in 1810. These are called the 5 famous codes of Napoleon. Okay. And to quote Napoleon himself, when he was dying, just before he died, Napoleon said, "My true glory is not to have won 40 battles. Waterloo will erase the memory of so many victories." He himself knew about it. I may have won 40 battles, but the fact that I lost Waterloo has erased that entire history of that. But what will live forever is my civil code. The code still, that's what he said. He was very sure that the codes that he introduced will live on. And today, I think 1/4 of the world is still having that code. And in terms of science, the metric system is what everybody's using. So, but we don't remember the man, but we remember the systems. And we use the systems. So an entrepreneur really will have to be content with the fact that his systems live on, his babies live on. He may not live on, he may not be endured, he may not be remembered, but he has made a change. That's basically what an entrepreneurship is about. And if you look at entrepreneurship, is to leave the world a better place than it was, is to have done something that you're proud of, is to do something that was thought to be not possible, is to enjoy your life and make it enjoyable for the people around you. So again, to quote Dr. Abdul Kalam, all the best, go and dream and make the world a great place. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manickam, for the Bumblebee inspirational speech and clips.